that time in between your proposal and the big wedding day can really help or hurt your future marriage. So, what do you want to do?
This is the Truth Pop Podcast with Jake and Cathy, a Catholic take on faith and culture. Be sure to subscribe.
Welcome to another episode of the Truth Pop Podcast. My name is Jake.
I'm Cathy.
Giving you a Catholic take on faith and culture, helping you to live out your faith in modern day society.
So today we want to talk about engagement and how do you prepare for that? How do you prepare for a sacramental marriage in a Christ-like way?
Hey, just a reminder, if you haven't already, please do subscribe to the Truth Pop Podcast. Would love to have you as part of the Truth Pop family, getting episodes when they come out. Please feel free to rate the podcast and give us your thoughts and share with your friends and family. Also, check out our new website, truthpop.net. Don't forget that along with the Truth Pop Podcast, there's also a new Truth Pop music channel streaming your favorite Christian music 24/7. So invite you to check that out right now, anytime, truthpop.net.
We want to give you 3 practical tools that will help your engagement and set your future marriage up for success. But first, we want to share our engagement story because it's just so beautiful.
It's kind of fun. I mean, so let's start. It was November 14th. Is that right?
Try again.
16th?
Try again.
17th?
Try again.
It's in November. I know that.
November 18th.
Oh, I was getting so close. Okay, so I'm a great husband here, starting off really well. November 18th. And you remember me being very focused, and you weren't quite sure why my personality was a little different.
Well, we went to the chapel, the adoration chapel that we prayed at. We prayed there a lot, actually. It was the same chapel that we went to on our 3rd date, and afterwards you had asked me to be your girlfriend for the first time. So it was very special to us. Mm-hmm. And it was a Saturday night, and you said, let's go to the chapel and pray. And I said, okay, sure. Yeah. I didn't think anything of it. But yeah, there was something about you that was so very like in control. You're like, okay, let's do this. Let's pray for this amount of time. Now let's go to the front. Okay, now let's go over here. And so I wasn't used to it because you usually are so laid back. You're like, oh, yeah.
Well, yeah, Wisconsin really got into my blood, where I definitely had that very laid back, kind of go with the flow attitude. And that would like drive you crazy.
Yeah, because I like being focused and being like, okay, let's be efficient. Let's spend this much time.
So you were attracted to that.
I liked it.
You're like, more of this, please.
Yeah.
None of this Wisconsin farm boy stuff anymore. But you also noticed I was texting a lot. I was on my phone a lot.
Yeah. You were a little distracted ahead of time.
Mm-hmm.
Like I noticed, like you usually open my car door for me, and you like took you took a really long time because you were texting.
That's
and I'm
right.
like,
yeah,
who's he texting?
And we'll get to that in a sec. But yeah, I think I definitely had a different persona because I had plans to propose in the chapel that night. And I was not going to let any mistake get in the way. But a mistake almost did happen. After we were wrapping up praying in the chapel, there was a very sweet older woman who heard knocking on the door, and she just rose up to let the people in the door. And I shot up at the same time. And I said, no, please sit down. And you're like, what in the world? Now he is yelling at older women praying in the chapel. You were really confused by that. But I was
a little confused.
I was trying to just make sure that, all our ducks were in a row, because what Cathy didn't know was my parents and Cathy's parents were actually coming to the chapel to see the proposal happen. And those were the people I was texting, where I was saying, hey, like, we're going to be there in about 20 minutes. Just hang on a little longer. So then, this woman was about to let them in. And I was like, no. Like, we're not ready yet. So I had to take care of that situation. Like, your parents were about to like walk in, and you even thought that you heard your parents talking to my parents at a certain point.
Yeah. Because my parents have a minivan and they have one of those like sliding doors that slam. I hear it so loud, like you could hear it from anywhere. And so like I heard that sliding door slam, and then I hear a man's voice who sounded like my dad say, "Hey, how are you doing?"
And we're like, no. I was thinking, no, please.
I was confused.
You were just confused. Yeah.
I was like, is that my dad? Is my dad in the parking lot right now? What?
And you notice my heart's starting to pound a lot, and my hands are cold. So we were like, did he just go outside? And then we're wrapping up to pray. And by the time we got out of the chapel is when I was like, oh, there's a bag sitting here. And I was like, here, you can open up this bag. I have a present for you. And you're like, oh, that's a little weird.
It was just kind of random because it was a random bag, like a Bath and Body Works bag, sitting on top of a table outside of the chapel in the lobby. And I'm like, wait, what?
Conveniently placed.
And so you're like, oh, I got you some lotion. And I'm like, that's kind of random, but thanks.
Yeah. Well, okay. I just used it as an excuse because I think I had mentioned to you a few days before that I was going to give that.
Oh yeah.
You. So it was the MacGuffin in the story for all you film buffs out there. But underneath, like I told you to keep opening up in the bag, and that's where the ring was. So that's when I proposed to you.
And that's when you got down on one knee.
Yeah. And you said yes, clearly. I mean, we're here together, yes. So it worked out.
Yes.
The plan worked. And then after that is when our parents came in and we took pictures, and we did try to get that sweet older woman to take a picture with us too, but she understandably refused.
She didn't want
She
to.
probably was hurt by my rudeness. So that was a great night. Really amazing, I think, just to have it in an adoration chapel, knowing that Jesus was there and guiding me through the whole situation, definitely giving me grace because I was nervous. But yeah, just a great time. And I think engagement for us, Cathy, I don't want to speak for you, but I learned a lot through it. I think I learned how much Catholics really need good marriage prep, and how sometimes really good marriage prep is not always easy to find.
Yeah, I was so excited for our marriage prep. If you're getting married in the Catholic Church, you have to go through a thing called pre-Cana, where basically it's either a day or a weekend where you are given tools to prepare for marriage. And I was super excited for the day. I was very disappointed by the pre-Cana that we had signed up for. I was expecting a lot, and I just felt like in a way it was just kind of checking a box. Like the marriage prep that we were given wasn't really fully explained, and it wasn't well executed.
Yeah.
I remember leaving that day just very disappointed because I had expected to prepare for our marriage because I was really excited for it.
It's understandable. Yeah. No, I'm with you. I think we learned that, like, marriage is a vocation, and I recognize that, priests who are going into seminary, they have 6 years of preparation. And it made me a little sad that I didn't feel like the preparation we were given in that day was anything near the amount that should be necessary for any Catholic couple. And you're right, it did seem like it was just checking a box. That's how I think a lot of the other people there were approaching it. But, I was living in Green Bay, Wisconsin at the time. So I think we talked about it, and we're like, hey, let's just see if Green Bay has a good marriage prep weekend. And it turned out they had an amazing weekend that we were able to do, which that was really the marriage prep we were looking for.
Yeah, it was like night and day because they were using the same program, but it was a whole weekend instead of just a day. And they had 3 couples instead of 1, and they gave really good engaging talks, and they actually explained what we were learning and what the conversations they wanted us to have. And it really helped us, even though it was like, I think it was like a month before we got married, right?
It was, yeah.
Still, I think that was really what we needed right before we got married, to just like start those conversations before you get married, because, you really want to prepare for your marriage while you're engaged. You don't want to just prepare for the wedding day, because I know that's a huge focus, like all the details, and it's a lot. Wedding planning it's very overwhelming and can be stressful at times, but what's more important than the wedding day is the marriage itself.
So that's a really good tip, number one, then. Yeah, like don't focus just on the wedding day, because that's a day, it comes and goes, and you really want to focus on what's ahead. And I like how Gary Thomas, he's a Christian author who wrote a book called Sacred Marriage, and he uses the analogy of a person who's about to climb a mountain isn't just going to show up one morning and start climbing the mountain. He's going to have adequate prep, make sure that he has all the tools needed. And marriage is the same way. You know, marriage is a mountain that you're about to climb if you're engaged. And so you have to be ready, and you have to be on the same page with your future spouse, making Jesus the center of that relationship. So you cannot scale this mountain unless Jesus is the center. So really bringing him in, and I think surrounding yourself with the sacraments and going to Mass together as a couple, I think is really important, and continuing to go to adoration, developing a daily prayer life together with your future spouse, and really getting to know who your future spouse is and what kind of prayer life they have, and understanding, okay, how can I help this person get to heaven? Because that's really going to be your primary responsibility when you get married, is leading your future spouse to heaven. So thinking about that during the engagement and not all of the details of the wedding day. That's really important.
Yeah. And I think one of the biggest things that helped us that we learned during that marriage prep weekend was about family of origin.
Oh, yeah.
And how every family does things differently. It doesn't mean it's wrong, but it's different.
Yeah.
And I think we both realized that both our families, like, while they had the same core values, the way they communicated was very different. So if you're not aware of something, it can really create tension.
Yeah, totally agree. I think family of origin was huge for us, and learning about that at our marriage prep. So that's tip number one. Focus more on your future marriage, not just on the wedding day. What's tip number two?
It's really important to enjoy your engagement and really embrace the time fully. I think there's such a temptation to want to skip ahead to when you're married, skip ahead to the wedding day, skip ahead to the honeymoon. There's something so special about the time of engagement, and it's a really sacred time that once you're married, you're never going to have again. So it's really important to really embrace that and enjoy it.
I think that's just a good lesson for us in general. Like, as there's a priest who was just giving a homily talking about how hard it is for adults to live in the moment. And I think engagement is especially that time that's just, it can be uncomfortable in some ways because you're so excited to jump into marriage. But the time of engagement is still important, and it's a time that's never going to come back for you in your relationship. So you're right. It has its own unique purpose, and God can give you special graces in that time if you're open to receiving them.
Yeah. Do you remember that one time we were at a restaurant and we were taking a picture together, and this random lady came up to us and she goes, "Excuse me, are you engaged?" And I don't know how she knew we were engaged. She didn't ask, "Are you married?" She said, "Are you engaged?" Yeah. And we're like, "Yeah, we are." And she's like, "I wish I was still engaged. I really missed that time."
But that made me kind of sad to hear that, because maybe that's how our culture looks at engagement, is that, you're entering into that honeymoon phase of your marriage. You're not there yet, but you're preparing for that. But I think that, every day is a new day with your spouse. So even if you've been married for 5-10 years, like wherever you're at, I think God wants you to still approach that sense of excitement in your marriage. And maybe that time that you're engaged now can, give you a little bit of prep to incorporate some of that engagement excitement later on into your marriage, to not let that go.
So the last tip we want to share with you is that it's very important to treat engagement as discernment, because you're not married until you're married. You're not married until you say those vows. And so it's really a time to discern, is this what God is calling me to? Is God calling me to marry this person? And yes, you may have said yes to the proposal, but you haven't made your vows yet.
You have to ask yourself, am I compromising in any way by my core values? So in one of our past dating episodes, we talked about how important it is to have a list written down, like, what are my core values? What are those deal breakers, those things that I will not compromise on? And if you're engaged to somebody who's very hostile to the Catholic faith, that's going to present some major problems down the road in your marriage. And yeah, of course, we have to realize that, we can't necessarily take issue with every sort of doubt that comes into our mind, right? Like there are certain things that we're going to say, okay, that's not so much of a big deal in my future marriage. But if it is a big deal, that's worth taking to prayer and asking God about a little bit, because now is that time to really take it seriously. Once you say, I do, you've made that commitment to be with the person in good times and in bad.
Absolutely. And it's really important to listen to the stirrings of your heart and bring that up to the surface. Don't sweep it under the rug, and share it with people you know and trust. Turn to those people that you know if you're having any concerns. Continue to bring that to prayer.
Yeah, I think one of the difficult things, babe, about Catholic engagement is that, if you've hopefully made purity a priority and you've done, so much intentional practicing of, waiting for marriage, it can be really hard when you're engaged, because I think sometimes we tend to think, oh, now I can be engaged, quote unquote, a little bit more, whether it's, crossing the line a little further. But I think we have to be honest with ourselves that, we're not married yet. And so being engaged in discernment is more important than being engaged within the relationship. And I think that really applies to cohabitation, which is a very difficult and, I recognize, a really sensitive topic. And I understand that, maybe people's personal situations can be challenging and they feel like they don't have a place to live. But I think it's worth pointing out that the stats for cohabitation really prove themselves to be detrimental to your future marriage. And so couples who live together before marriage really do set themselves up for difficult possibilities of divorce. The latest statistics show that it could be 50% or higher of a chance of divorce. And there's a really good article from Catholic Match that we can post in the show notes that'll give you a little bit more insight into that. Just inviting you to pray into that situation, asking God to just show you what his will is for you. We approach this with complete sensitivity, but we do lovingly challenge you to really ask yourself that difficult question about, am I in a place where I might be able to move out before getting married?
Yeah, that is so challenging, because it's a high call, right? It's a challenging call, because it's not what our culture is telling us. Our culture tells us, no, like, try it out first. Like, see if you can get used to that person. See if you can live with that person first. But we know as Catholics that marriage is permanent.
Yeah.
When you get married in the church, God joins you together. Matthew chapter 19, verse 6 says, what God has joined together, let no one separate.
Yeah, that's really a high call. We as Catholics are called to heroic sanctity within our marriages and within our engagements. So maybe you really feel tempted to be like, oh, like I want to just test out the waters a little bit. How do I know for sure that this person is the right person? I think that if you're praying about it, I think if you're bringing God into the relationship and then the engagement and your future marriage, God's going to show you if this person is the right person that you're engaged to. And I think at a certain point, our culture wants a complete safety net. And that's, I think, why we have so much cohabitation. I think that's why we have so many people just sleeping around, because we're afraid of commitment. We're afraid of jumping in. But I think we have to recognize that marriage is difficult and it's not for ourselves. So marriage is going to be like that really cold pool of water where you're preparing yourself to jump in and it's going to be cold, but at a certain point that you can't really test the waters. You can do enough discernment. You can do enough planning. You can do enough preparation. You got to do all of that. It matters. But at a certain point, maybe God is just saying, okay, I'm ready for you to jump in. And I'm going to be there for you.
This is the Truth Pop Podcast. Fill your faith.